Welcome back. Today we are looking at the r/askreddit question. What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event? Let's jump right in and learn about some interesting events in the past. When King Edward I was young, before he was king, he was a prisoner of Simon de Montfort during a civil war. During his captivity he asked to ride the horses at the castle where he was being held. He proceeded to ride them one by one, tiring them all out. When it came to the last horse he mounted, bade his captors farewell and rode away. All of the other horses were too tired to give effective chase. The story of Daniel Inouye, a World War II vet and later senator from Hawaii. His story reads like a bad, over-the-top action movie. As soon as Japanese Americans were allowed to enlist, he dropped out of school and signed up. Within a year, he became a sergeant and headed a platoon, getting deployed in the Italian campaign. In the battle to save the lost brigade, he was shot directly above the heart, saved by a silver dollar kept in his pocket. He was promoted to lieutenant, the youngest officer in the regiment. In the Battle of San Terenzo, he led from the front. As he led his platoon in a flanking maneuver, 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away, pinning his men to the ground. Inouye stood up to attack and was shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wound, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun position, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. He stood back up. As his squad distracted the third machine gunner, Lieutenant Inouye crawled toward the final bunker, coming within 10 yards. As he raised himself on his left elbow and cocked his right arm to throw his last hand grenade, a German soldier saw Inouye and fired a 30mm Sesbsha anti-personnel rifle grenade from inside the bunker, which struck Inouye directly on his right elbow. The high-explosive grenade failed to detonate, saving Lieutenant Inouye from instant death but amputating most of his right arm at the elbow, except for a few tendons and a flap of skin, via blunt force trauma. Despite this gruesome injury, Lieutenant Inouye was again saved from likely death due to the blunt, low-velocity grenade tearing the nerves in his arm unevenly and incompletely, which involuntarily squeezed the grenade tightly via a reflex suck instead of going limp and dropping it at Inouye's feet. However, this still left him crippled, in terrible pain, under fire with minimal cover and staring at a live grenade clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. Inouye's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to keep back out of fear his severed fist would involuntarily relax and drop the grenade. As the German inside the bunker began hastily reloading his rifle with regular full metal jacket ammunition, replacing the wood-tipped rounds used to propel rifle grenades, Inouye quickly pried the live hand grenade from his useless right hand and transferred it to his left. The German soldier had just finished reloading and was aiming his rifle to finish him off when Lieutenant Inouye threw his grenade through the narrow firing slit, killing the German. Stumbling to his feet with the remnants of his right arm hanging grotesquely at his side and his Thompson in his offhand, braced against his hip, Lieutenant Inouye continued forward, killing at least one more German before suffering his 5th and final wound of the day, in his left leg, which finally halted his one-man assault for good and sent him tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see the worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was to gruffly order them back to their positions, saying nobody called off the war. In 496 BC the army of King Gagnon of Ue put 3 ranks of criminals in the front of their battle formation. Their task was to impress the enemy with their ferocity and commitment by chopping off their own heads as soon as battle was joined. The tactic was a success. While their opponents from the state of Wu were recovering from their astonishment, they were overrun by the rest of the Yu army. The convicts, who were condemned men anyway, had been coerced by the threat that if they didn't comply with this plan their families would be executed also. Stephen Fry on Chi. I think cutting off one's own head is pretty unlikely, but they might have slit their own throats. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water, and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note: these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late, because they were still using the Julian calendar. In 1904. Seriously. This needs to be a movie. The Return of Napoleon. An army was sent to intercept him, and they ended up fighting for him. If it were shown in a movie most people would have considered it cheesy and unrealistic. The Great Stink of London in 1858. One summer the heat dried up the River Thames, where all the human waste went, and an unbearable smell pervaded throughout the entire city. All Parliament representatives were eventually coerced out of their homes outside of London to convene and solve the issue. Much to the citizens' glee, Parliament was held in their building on the bank of the River Thames, resulting in one of the fastest Parliament decisions ever made to reform the London sewer system. Vesna Vulovic fell from a height of 10,160 meters and lived. She holds the world record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. The London beer flood of 1814. When one vat of beer at Mucks and Company Brewery exploded, it proceeded to cause a domino effect of other vats to also burst, causing a tidal wave that flooded a neighborhood, leaving crumbled homes in its path as well as 8 people dead, and dozens injured. The town of Rothenburg ob der Tauber in Germany, one of the country's oldest and most preserved cities. Essentially during the 30 Years' War, the Catholic army wanted to destroy the town because they resisted the church. Count von Tilly, sounds like a Monty Python name, was going to destroy the town, but as a gesture of peace the town offered him a mass, 3¼ liters, of local wine. He declared that if anyone in the town could drink the mass of wine in one go, he would spare the town and move on. Then someone just walked up and did it. So the army left. Much later during World War II, when the US was performing air raids, someone in the White House knew of this town and pleaded that we do not destroy it. So it has been saved from 2 wars, all because one guy chugged a bunch of wine. Paddy Roy Bates, the founding king of Sealand, had his country, a small naval platform, invaded and his son Michael taken hostage by Dutch and German mercenaries. They came in riding jet skis, speedboats, and helicopters while he was in England buying groceries. He hired a helicopter, came down Europe with a shotgun, reconquered Sealand and took the mercenaries hostage. An official German diplomat was sent to negotiate the release of the ringleader. The Japanese kamikaze, Divine Wind, that saved the country from an amphibious invasion by the Mongolian hordes. The Mongols captured a foothold on some outlying Japanese islands, and started to attack the mainland. The Japanese army pushed them back, and they had to retreat to China. When they did, a typhoon ravaged their navy and sank their ships. The Mongolians, probably reasonably, seeing this as a fluke, decided to rebuild and attack again. 7 years later. Unfortunately for them, the Japanese fortified their coastline. After basically months of sailing around seeking a place to land, another typhoon struck their fleet and destroyed them. There would be no third invasion. Jack, a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day, and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. Some guy in Australia decided he wanted to hunt rabbits, but rabbits don't live in Australia, so then he released like 12 in his backyard, and now there's a crap ton of rabbits in Australia. The owner and bartender of a bar once tried to take out an insurance policy on one of their alcoholic customers with one of their friends, in an attempt to make some fast cash. They immediately opened his tab up, hoping he would drink himself to death. That didn't work, so they began spiking his unlimited drinks with antifreeze. That didn't work, so they decided to pump carbon monoxide into his apartment one night. He still wouldn't die. They then beat him savagely and put him in the back of their car to bury him in a rural area. Halfway out there, they heard noises coming from the trunk of the car. He still hadn't died, and when they stopped and got him out, he began walking away under his own power. It took 3 times being hit with a car to finally kill him. That man may be the closest thing we've ever had to a superhero. Edit, since posting I've been made aware that his name was Michael Molloy, if anyone wants to read further about his story. The fire in Dublin, Ireland on June 18, 1875. A fire broke out and spread to a malt house, and the heat broke open every alcohol barrel and flooded the streets with it. The people of Dublin decides to drink the burning alcohol that is spreading in the streets, filled with litter and debris, and was literally on fire. 13 people died not from the fire or smoke but from alcohol poisoning they got from drinking the street whiskey. In the 1800s there were street vendors in Egypt who sold ancient Egyptian mummies. Just lined them up on a street corner and sold them like they were umbrellas on a rainy day. English tourists would buy them to display as oddities. The entire Qing Rebellion. A war started by a Chinese peasant who dreamed, and believed, he was Jesus' younger brother. Although poor, the first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged. Took over a city. Asked the British why they wouldn't pay him tribute as the new head of their faith. Engaged in total war with the king. Applied pseudo-communist policies like abolishing private property. Separated women and men from ever interacting, and sent the women to the front lines. Over 20 million people died, with some estimates as high as 40 million. It was the 4th deadliest conflict in human history. It killed more people than World War I. Only World War II, transition of the Ming, and Qing conquest of the Ming were deadlier. The Glasgow Ice Cream Wars, 6 people died in a turf war over ice cream van routes. They were dealing heroin out of the vans. The rise and fall of Alexander the Great. Never lost a battle in his life, conquered the whole known world, and only stopped because his soldiers were tired. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and lifted to an altitude of 10 kilometers. She landed 3.5 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. In 1504, a German imperial knight lost his hand to a cannon shot which forced his sword against him. He lived pretty amazing for that time, and instead of, stopping with fighting and living the rest of his life in peace, he had an iron hand forged. Some Jaime Lannister stuff. Let me repeat that. This mother chonker had an iron hand prosthetic over 500 years ago. He continued fighting for 40 years, after which he chilled in the castle of Hornburg for his final years. His name was Gots of the Iron Hand, and the hand itself is still at display. Do you know a historical event that sounds like total fiction? Let us know in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe for a new video every day. Ta-ta for now.